us. And the sooner we grasp that, the better. It's not about us, but about God, and then, of course, also his desire to work in and through us. This, I believe, Bob had grasped deeply and well. God, always his reliable source of joy, a never-ending source of help and encouragement, especially when a funeral director's life is in constant, spontaneous responding to some pretty shocking life changes for those he is called to serve. God, always present in times of need and trouble. God, the source of inspiration and creativity. But above all, God, our model in Jesus of sacrificial life and delight in serving others from the heart. Lots of connections in those statements to Bob's life. And then the second verse, faith expressing itself in love, that is, in very tangible ways. True living faith works, is always very tangible and discoverable in acts of love. Working with him on the Bridge Builders ministry stands out to me as an example in Bob's life. Bob was driven, I believe, by Jesus' words, "What you do to the least of these, you have done to me." Now, that phrase, "the least of these," in Matthew 25, could refer to either fellow Christians as lowly people subject to persecution and other difficulties, or beyond that to all people, however insignificant they might appear on the surface. The key prerequisite for that kind of action, serving the least of these as if it were Christ, as if they were Christ, what is required is compassion, of course. And that has already been referenced with respect to Bob. Bob was not a status-seeking or status-conscious person, but rather chose to follow in the natural footsteps of Jesus, who throughout his earthly life never sought the lofty societal places or accolades. That fundamental attitude defines, I believe, the Jesus approach of true faith acting in love. To act this way to the lowly, Bob had an eye for those kinds of people, reveals what kind of people we really are, doesn't it? Thanks, Bob, for living that out in a very humble way. Of course, I might to this new young couple. He never forgot that gesture of love and service. So as a pastor, I can simply say to Bob and you, Mary, thank you for modeling the Christ life to us. As you just heard it read. It stated Bob served as an inspiration for Todd, who is here today, and others, of course, to be more committed to service first. What a great bottom line statement. When all's said and done, what remains of our lives is service to the least of these. I remember discussing his involvement in the funeral business one time, and many of you have probably had that discussion with him too, and discovered some significant overlap in his understanding or philosophy of his work and life and my personal philosophy of ministry as a pastor. Is this a job through which I make money? Or is it a calling which also supplies me with a means of living? We must make a living, of course, but we are, he stated clearly with reference to his funeral director years, serving people first. And we often do that in moments of crisis and grief to boot. My brief thoughts connecting those two key Bible passages or Bible verses with Bob's life. And at this time, I'd like to hand the microphone over to James, followed by Harry Fraser.
Well, to everyone that's here today, I got to read this because this is my cousin, so pardon me. On behalf of my family, Gerald and Lois and Andrea, who are watching virtual, this is still working right now?
Yeah, I just...
We would like to thank all of you for coming on a beautiful Saturday to spend some time with us. It's been a dark few days, but the sunshine is very nice. And while I want to welcome everyone here, I just want to emphasize what Mom and I have been thinking for a long time, is that our heart breaks for Gerald and Lois, who can't be here. And that's essentially why we're doing this live stream. We're happy for everyone that came along, everyone that's joining us, but it's an audience of 3 that we're particularly concerned about. Due to the coronavirus, they will not be able to be here today to mourn with Mom and the rest of us, but we are grateful for technology that will and is allowing them to join us. So to everyone online, here in person, for the flowers, the cards, the phone calls, the emails, the texts, the food, your kindness is nothing short of overwhelming. Our motivation as a family, excuse me, our motivation as a family in planning this service for Dad was to do it as Dad has done for hundreds, maybe thousands of people. And unfortunately, COVID has changed that. This is not conventional. Yesterday night, at the viewing with all of 4 people in the room, that was not conventional. But COVID changed all that. And if some people are watching online and wondering why they're seeing people here and this is a private burial, our hands were tied. The government restrictions were 50 people. And Lois put it best. She said, our family grieves that we had to narrow it down to 50 people. But we had no choice. If Jared was here, he would have a couple of things he'd want to say. And one is the bitter irony of here we are at a sacred ritual in the middle of a global pandemic. It's sort of hard to process. In fact, this whole thing is surreal, personally. Growing up in the home that I did, I've seen hundreds of people in coffins, seen hundreds of processions of cars, and now all of a sudden, it's Dad, it's Grandpa, and an uncle, and now we're following the hearse. It's been surreal. The other thing, and Pastor Walter mentioned this, it is not lost on Gerald and Lois and myself that as we struggled to put these plans together, we were making funeral plans for a man who was an expert at making funeral plans. They were enormous shoes to fill. If there was one word that most people, in fact, I would say almost everyone, when they would share some condolences, extend their sympathies, they talked about Dad being kind. Your dad was kind. What a kind man. He was so kind. And I don't know about you, Mom, or kids, that's a nice word. He was a kind man. I have to say a few thank yous. Harry Fraze from Friends Funeral Home is a long-time friend of the family. His wife Lorna and Gerald and her sister Lorna go back because we tried figuring out a year, just as far back as we can remember. And it is Mom and I were making funeral arrangements. Lois and Gerald we were all in Todd's office. They were there virtually. And when Todd said Harry has asked whether he could be part of the service, Jared started crying instantly. And so we're touched that you could be with us today. To the church family, to the church body, many of whom, are here today. Our family cannot thank you enough for all your help these past challenging years. I would love to name you all, but I'd miss someone and that would bug me. So you know who you are, both online and here in person. Most of the people here that were so good at taking Mom to visit Dad, taking Mom to appointments, doing stuff. We would be in a panic, and Gerald and Lois would email the team. And so, again, you know who you are, and from our family to yours. There's some deep comfort. Dad devoted his life to that church. And when we needed help, you gave it in return. Sowing what Dad reaped, or reaping what Dad sowed. I do want to just mention two people from the church family. I hope it's okay. Ruth is here. Ruth has been a close family friend for a long time, has done innumerable things for Mom and Dad, including but not limited to grooming Dad's toenails. And I just add that because in terms of like a Christian service and love for Dad, Ruth, thank you. I've only got about 17 more pages and then I'm done. Eleanor Weeb, I don't know if she is here. Sweet Eleanor. Lois stays with her all the time she comes to Steinbach, which is frequently. Eleanor takes Mom grocery shopping every Friday. She drives her all over the place and does probably 60 to 80 things that I can't even think of. And as I shared yesterday, when the nurses at Rusthaven said, get your mom, I was at Dad's bedside and they said, get your mom here, it's time. It's 5:30 in the morning. It was Eleanor that brought Mom to Rusthaven. You are a saint, Eleanor. Thank you. To the ballbearers, Russ, Wayne, Ken, Stan, Lauren, and Gord, they are all Dad's uncles. Sorry, Dad was their uncle. They are all Dad's nephews. And as the relatives who are here and maybe watching online, Dad loved his nieces and nephews. And Wayne, cousin Wayne, was joking that, don't worry, James, we've got the pallbearer thing down pat. Dad had trained him many, many years ago at Loewen Funeral Home. And there is something, so thank you, good job, Wayne, you guys did a great job. There is something, there's a level of, I would say, profound or almost sacred connection that at the last ritual for Dad connects family and business. And to have the 6 nephews carry him to his final resting place is very special. The bond of love in our family is strong, and Dad would have been so proud to have you 6 be his pallbearers. To Uncle Waldy and Gloria, boy, the bond of family love is exhibited in no greater way than it is by what Waldy has done for our family, for Bob in particular, driving from Kenora all the way to Winnipeg to sit with Dad and us to explain what was going on as Dad's medical issues became more and more pronounced. When he and Gloria would come to visit their family in Winnipeg, they would almost all the time, very frequently, just make a detour to Steinbach, just to drop in on Mom and Dad. And so, to both of you, but especially Waldy as the brother, thank you for being such a wonderful brother to Dad. Camera's there. Andrea, this is for you. Lois came here so often to take care of Mom and Dad for years, for weeks at a time, several times a year. And she left you, she left the life you have together. And your patience and understanding and your compassion and your love for Mom and for Dad and for all of us is just hard to articulate, probably impossible to articulate. But we love you and we thank you. To my brother Gerald, I'll try and go quickly here. Gerald's been a pillar of emotional strength to Mom, and will certainly be now that she's alone. She mentions very often, James, I don't know what I'd do without Jared. We have all these talks. So thank you, Gerald. To Lois, I could spend another hour listing everything that she does for Mom and Dad and for the family. I won't, other than to say it's pretty much everything. And the greatest way to describe how much time she spent here, the day after Dad passed away, where I was cleaning out some of his stuff at Rest Haven, and one of the nurses came up to me and said, I just found out that Lois didn't live in Steinbach. I just found out she lived in Halifax. I just assumed she lived here. So Lois, you are an angel on earth, and Gerald and I will never, ever, ever be able to thank you enough for what you've done for Mom and Dad and for the family. And I have to say, in doing these plans, these crazy COVID funeral plans without even a proper burial for our husband, our father, our uncle, our grandfather, we could not have done this on our own, and we did it as a family. We're a good team. To Olivia Niz, Dad never had a bigger, the line in the obituary was perfect. Dad never had a bigger or brighter smile than when he was with his grandchildren. Grandma's going to need you now more than ever, and I know you'll be there. And finally, Mom, I don't think I ever heard you complain about taking care of Dad. You may have, I never heard it. And as Dad's cognitive and medical issues began to increase and he became harder and harder to take care of, you never complained. You loved him, and for 67 years, literally right up until Dad's last breath, as we were holding his hand, you showed what devotion, dedication, love, compassion was. And it's just unbelievable. Okay, before I completely lose it, we'll move on to some stuff for lunch. We have some bookmarks. By the way, if you didn't get the invite, we're going to have a little picnic at 80 Pinner Park, and we have some laminated bookmarks we can give you there. We can give you as we leave here, whatever you want. We've got some for you. When we get to 80 Park, I'll need a couple of minutes just to bring in Lois and Gerald in via Google Duo so they can participate. And we'll have a little stand for them, and then by all means, come and say hi. They'd love to hear from each and every one of you, so please do that. For Grace, we will sing the Loewen family theme song, or Wayne team song. And on a few picnic tables, for those of us that aren't familiar with all things already, there's some little pieces of paper with the lyrics on the picnic table. Feel free to grab one. That'll be our Grace. For those of you that are from out of town, I forgot to say, for all of you who traveled to get here on a beautiful day, on a weekend, thank you. Some of you had to make special plans to make this happen, so thank you. So for those of you that are not familiar with Steinbach, when you leave the cemetery here, turn right, go back to the number 12 highway, drive, I don't know, maybe a mile, and when you get to the traffic lights where the golf course is, turn right again, and then I believe it's the first driveway on your right-hand side. It's 80 Pinner Park, and you can't miss the big picnic shelter. And Lois was of the many things she's done for this these 2 days. She explained yesterday the lunch itself might be unconventional. We're not sure whether the caterer has ever done this before, so we're not sure if it's going to be paper bags, whether they serve it, whether it's buffet style. This is sort of new for everyone, so we'll be patient, and it'll be so great. And what a lovely day to have you all share. And finally, as I said earlier, our inspiration, our motivation was to try and give Dad a funeral service like he gave to so many others. And COVID has made that not possible. So when things sort of get back to normal and we can go back to church and we can sing hymns and tell some stories and have an open mic and say some stories about our uncle, our neighbor, our church family member, we will have a proper, as close as we can, a proper burial service. So thank you so much for coming. It's meaningful for all of us. Sorry for the long time.
Thank you to the Loewen family and Todd for letting me impose myself today. And thank you, Olivia, for referring to me as a present-day funeral director. Most of my staff say I'm a funeral director from the past already. So thank you. Thank you. Often when I'm at funeral services and I don't understand the connection of who's there and why they're there, I'm bold enough to ask, well, why are you here? What's your connection? As though you need a ticket to come to a funeral or a funeral service. So here I am, and I've been asked to explain a little bit about why I'm really here. And I often, when I'm asked what I do and why I do it, I often go to 1,000 years ago when he was asked, why did you eat the apple? He said, it's the woman God gave me. And that's really why I'm here today, too. Very early in my dating years with Lorna, I heard about this Gerald Loewen. And Gerald Loewen was giving roses to Lorna. So I realized very early on that the carnations and dandelions from my farm wouldn't cut it. So that's the first connection. Then I, of course, married Lorna, and her husband, or her uncle, was a funeral director. So again, I do what I do because I married the niece of a funeral director. That I married the niece of a plumber, I might be at a plumber's convention today, I don't know. But that's that part of the story. So I'm just trying to give the little thread, or the Loewen thread, in the fabric of our life. Then as I worked with Walter Clausen, who started his career with Bob, I don't know how many times when we were waiting at a church for the pallbearers to help us move the deceased and the casket into the church, Walter would comment, well, when Bob and I were doing it, we would carry the casket alone up the stairs. I heard that time and time again. So just for your knowledge or for your information, when my brother-in-law Harold was still a partner at the funeral home, one day we did also carry the deceased and the casket up about 10 flights of stairs. So I now too can tell my staff, when Harold and I did it, we carried it ourselves. So Bob continues that tradition. Then my wife and I went to Nigeria with MCC, and there we intersected with some of Mary's family. We got to know her brother George, who was a missionary in southern Nigeria, and we were in central Nigeria. And just, you know, George to us was known as Hallelujah George. That was him. So that's where we intersected with Mary's family. Then coming back, I again worked at the funeral home in Winnipeg, and Bob's brother Ray became my boss in 1993. And it was a good experience, and yet I realized very quickly, knowing Bob already through the family connections, I realized very quickly why Bob wasn't a member of a corporate funeral home. It made sense. It made sense. And I always appreciated Bob's words of encouragement to me and affirmation in what I was doing. It was always a gift. Then, now I know a funeral director shouldn't talk at cemeteries. We also intersected with Bob and Mary because we too have a child that still to this day experiences condemnation and ostracization because of who she is. And I want to thank Lois and Andrea, James, and Gerald, and Bob and Mary for helping us in that journey. You've been a gift to us. So as you see, that's just some of the threads that the Loewen family has been a part of our fabric of life. And that will continue. And it's a gift. Now, just in closing, I want to just leave one thing with Bob, because it was mentioned earlier that we often do funerals for many different denominations. And in the Ukrainian Catholic tradition, there's a saying or a prayer or a song that's always ends the graveside. And many of you have probably heard the words, Vichnaya Pamyat. Bob. Vichnaya Pamyat, eternal memories. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Well, we now come to what is called the middle part of the service. Before I read a very striking and important passage from the New Testament and allow it to speak for itself, it's important for us to remind ourselves once again that as we lay Bob's body to rest, we're laying the shell of who Bob is to rest. Not an evil shell, as in some religions, just mortal. Genesis 3, verse 19, we're told, "For you are dust, and to dust you shall return." When I hear those words and think about them many times over the years, they sound so final, even hopeless. But it isn't final or hopeless, because we have these words of Scripture in 1 Corinthians chapter 15. Paul writes, "As was the man of dust, so also are those who are of the dust. And as is the man of heaven, that is Jesus, the resurrected one, so also are those who are of heaven. Just as we have borne the image of the man of dust, we shall also bear the image of the man of heaven." And then he goes on to say, "I tell you this, brothers and sisters, flesh and blood cannot inherit the kingdom of God, nor does the perishable inherit the imperishable. Behold, I tell you a mystery. We shall not all sleep, but we shall all be changed in a moment, in the twinkling of an eye, at the last trumpet. For the trumpet will sound, and the dead will be raised imperishable, and we shall be changed. For this perishable body must put on the imperishable, and this mortal body must put on." When the perishable puts on the imperishable, and the mortal puts on immortality, then shall come to pass the saying that is written, "Death is swallowed up in victory. O death, where is your victory? O death, where is your sting?" The sting of death is sin. The power of sin is the law. But thanks be to God, who gives us the victory through our Lord Jesus Christ. And may those words really stay with us, even as we say our final goodbyes. Now, I want to say a prayer. Ask the Lord. And I invite you, as I conclude my prayer, to join me in saying the Lord's Prayer as well. Father in heaven, final remains of Bobby, but in the full knowledge of the promise that you have given to us in Scripture, that he, the man lives on in your presence, promise to us, so that we too will be encouraged and be people of like faith, following hard in the footsteps of Jesus as we learn to serve each other and this world in the name of Jesus. Thank you so much, Father in heaven, for Bob. We commit to you his wife and family. We ask that you would comfort them, strengthen them, help them to be seekers of you and your grace that you offer to us through Jesus Christ. And now we pray together. Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come. Thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen. And now the benediction. Now may the God of peace, who brought again from the dead our Lord Jesus, the great shepherd of the sheep, by the blood of the eternal covenant, equip you with everything good, that you may do his will, working in us that which is pleasing in his sight, through Jesus Christ, to whom be glory forever and ever. And God's people said, Amen. So you are all invited to 80 Penner Park. The family will stay for a few moments here at the graveside, and then we'll see you all there. Oh, one final thing. I think we owe it to Mary and the family to give them at least a virtual hug. Can we try that? Reach out your arms. May that be the hug that we would all love to have given each one of you. God bless you.
That's right. Did you get the virtual hug on there?
Yeah. Yeah.